Welcome to another episode of TTYL or Not, Theological Talks You Like or Not. I am sitting here with Will O'Brien, who I consider a close personal friend of mine, my neighbor in Philadelphia. And we're just going to get into this session because Will does so much for the community. It's just a profound person to be around. In small moments can shift your perspective. And I hope that he will shift yours today. Welcome
to Theology Talk You Like or Not. I am your creator, curator, investigator, sometime instigator, but definitely a liberator, Rev to say. And for a few moments of your sacred time in this sacred space, I invite you to tune in as we talk good, talk back, talk loud, talk smack, talk life and love, talk true, talk music, talk art, talk faith, hope, peace, joy, talk justice, talk God. Let's talk.
Thanks so much. It's so great to be here, to be part of this project, and yes, to really be grateful for your friendship. And I feel honored and blessed by this community and the ancestors and the sisters, and it's just really beautiful to be in this space.
My Womanist Wall, it has grown. It's almost done, not complete, but It is one of my personal projects.
I feel grateful for being welcomed.
Awesome. So, Will, let's start off. Define theology. How do you define theology? And what has brought you to your own theological framework?
It's so funny because in some ways, I don't think of myself as a theologian in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I say we're all theologians. Anytime we're engaging in any sort of reflection on God or on the divine, that's theology. I've studied academic traditional theology. There's certain things I draw from it. But I think theology for me, it's more related to what faith is for me, and I see faith so much as active and engaged. The life of faith is intrinsically experiential, and I find as I go on in life, I'm moving away from a traditional Western model, probably a traditional male model too, that faith is certain ideas, and the job of theology is to clarify those ideas. In what sense was Jesus a theologian? I mean, a storyteller, told puzzles and riddles, but he also used his actions to embody who God was. Who God is. And so in a lot of ways, my theological framework is spiritual and experiential, if that makes sense.
Yes. It reminds me of one of the phrases that stuck with me even after I left seminary is, we can pray, but we need to pray with our feet. Right. So the experimental part is the doing, there's the being, which I think we need to get back to a little bit when it comes to intentional work, just completely being. But there's also the doing, the active work of living out this faith, living out this understanding of God and the divine.
And there's the other famous phrase is the one attributed to St. Francis: preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words.
Yes.
But I also think that where theology happens in my life these days is in groups, in reflection groups. And I know we'll talk later about the Alternative Seminary, but folks who gather around the Word and bring their experiences and we reflect together on that combination of what is the Scripture saying and what does it mean for our life. I think that's real theological work in the flesh.
Awesome. Let's get into your work since you've already brought it up. Awesome work in the community. Alternative Seminary, intentional community. Even the work you do at Project H.O.M.E seems to be very much intentionally aligned with a particular purpose. What is your purpose? What is your life purpose?
I really feel it's very simple. I just am passionate about following Jesus because I think, and I don't have any grand theology about what Christ means per se, but Jesus embodies God's will, God's being, and the formation of the phrase that means so much to me that comes from Dr. King, beloved community. I guess if I had a core theology, it would be we are all God's precious children. And I think that's the core of the good news. And everything Jesus is about is both affirming persons' preciousness, especially those who have been marginalized, and inviting people to build a community that'll manifest that beloved community in the midst of what Walter Wink would call the domination system. My convictions have been formed by just unfathomably beautiful experiences with folks who've been on the margins, folks with mental health struggles, folks who've known unbelievable suffering, folks from very different communities where we just connect with each other. You know, and I work at Project H.O.M.E, an organization that does housing for support services. There's a real clear journey for me that I'm a Christian do-gooder trying to help the less fortunate to I am a member of a community where we're all sharing our gifts and acknowledging our brokenness. So that to me is gospel truth, and whenever that happens, it just evokes a deep passion in me.
Yes. Alternative Seminary. How did that come about? Tell them a little bit about it and what birthed that out.
Sure. The Alternative Seminary is a totally grassroots, non-organizational, I'm not even sure what's called, a network of folks here in the Philadelphia area. Many years ago, about 25, there are a few of us, including myself, who are engaged in social ministry, political advocacy, and just struggling with the questions of what is a truly faith-based, biblically based effort to engage in the world. What are issues of power? What are issues of how we work for justice with the various systems and movements? So we all felt a similar urge to deepen our biblical roots. And we wanted to gather to do that. Now, one of the members of the circle had been called by the presbytery to go up to Princeton for theology, and she came back tearing her hair out. Like, no, I can't do it that way. And somehow in one of the conversations, somebody said, and you know those cartoon moments of the light bulb? It was totally that. Why don't you start your own seminary? And yes.
Wow.
And we called upon an old friend of ours, Dick Shaw, who was an elder at that time. He had ironically taught at Princeton and had been, he says, thrown out because, quote, he took it too seriously. And he had been involved in a lot of work in Latin America and Central America. He worked with Paulo Freire and the conscientization movement. And he was very passionate about bringing new ways to engage in Scripture to North America. And he also found it very frustrating because mostly white people get very excited, but then would kind of stop at a certain point.
Right.
So he gave us some models to work with, and a bunch of us gathered together and just started it, and it was just so powerful. And after a couple of years of doing Old Testament, New Testament, or I should say Hebrew Bible and New Testament, we kind of gathered together and said, we've got something going here. And it's just continued. We have a variety of different classes. In a way, it's an open forum, so anybody who wants to come and bring something, whether it's a several-week class or a Saturday morning presentation, we try to create the space for it. And we've just had so many amazing offerings. And even if I teach the same class, let's say the liberating look at Paul's work or Jubilee economics, every time I gather with a new group, it is just so exciting. People have such a hunger. And a lot of people who are escaping kind of suffocating religion, whether it's Catholicism or evangelicalism, when you open up the possibilities of a new way to experientially engage in Scripture, oh my gosh, it's just so exciting.
Yeah, especially being in a room where to hear people's experience, how they come to the sacred text, how they understand it, and a lot of it is foundationally built on what was given to us, passed down to us from our family and from our churches, and it's. And I wrestle sometimes with my own foundation. Right. But there is this amount of gratitude because if not for that foundation, I wouldn't be so moved to come to know God for my own self. And especially experiencing God in people, re-understanding God, you know what I'm saying, for myself as people are understanding God. And this is what this platform is all about, is we all are doing theology in some capacity, based on our foundation, based on our own understanding, and based on our encounter with the divine as well as with ourselves and others. I think the church, in some capacity, this new generation is not coming to church as frequently as we used to go to church. And this, I'm speaking specifically of those within the Protestant faith. And to have that alternative that can still connect us within community and explore sacred texts is a beautiful thing. Tell me about this intentional community.
We're an intentional community of 3 families, and possibly a 4th joining us later. We are coming together in our faith and a desire to live an alternative lifestyle that's more just and sustainable.
We're extremely aware of environmental injustices. In fact, if anything, that kind of injustice has already marked our neighborhood. So we try to save resources by farming, simple living, and communal living.
Did not found me. I did not choose this
You didn't sign
time
to
of
read.
Band-Aid.
We live in a fiercely individualistic culture, so this provides an opportunity to experiment an alternative, more community-based life, both in our economic practice and our commitments to each other.
I've felt a call toward community most of my adult life because it seemed that the New Testament model of discipleship was very communally based. In fact, I would argue that so much of the theological deconstruction we have to do around our ideas of Scripture and theology, one of the biggest ones is American individualism, which is particularly true of white folks. If you could take off the blinder of individualism, I think that opens up a lot of space for seeing the New Testament, the Bible as a whole, in new ways. So somehow this notion of community seemed very rich and important, and I've been connected to various streams of people who have formed communities over the years. I had a short-lived intentional community in the Kensington neighborhood called Jeremiah House, but we were a little immature and we were sort of radical without being intentional about our relationships. But interestingly, especially in this time of Czar Donald, as I call him, in this dark time,
What do you call him? Hold on.
Czar Donald.
Czar Donald.
Donald Czar. It so happened that my partner Dee Dee and I were renting a house in a back lot of this beautiful big property. The front house had many units, and we had a back house for our family. And we always said, wouldn't it be great to have this whole land inform cooperative housing? And a long and lurid tale, but we were able to purchase it with God's grace.
So
And,
the lot was already empty. You all knew about it.
Yes.
And
Well, it's part of the property that we lived on. We were able to buy the whole property, the front house and the back house, and almost like a football field of land. And
right. So what I'm saying, because I've seen this,
Yeah.
the land. So it was always connected as
Yes.
one. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was that makes sense because there is no front really
No.
to that. Okay.
So that was a little bit of God's earth that was graciously made possible for us. And we've been in dialogue with different peoples, and we were in discussion, and we centered on a set of core commitments. Supporting each other in our vocations and our discipleship, struggling in whatever forms we would, consciously struggling against the isms, racism and militarism and everything else, and based on the land, trying to practice environmentally holy resistance to climate change and other things. A commitment to hospitality. If we were going to have this large house, one of the ways to give thanks for the gift is to make sure one of our apartments is there for people in need or in transition. But we also have a commitment to joy and celebration.
Yeah.
Especially
Thursday night dinners. Those
Yes.
are really nice.
So there are 5 households, and they range from an older single woman with her semi-adult kids to a young couple who moved all the way from Michigan to be with us. Somehow, a lot of it was around the Alternative Seminary network of people, of which there are hundreds in Philadelphia. We just put the word out, and there are a lot of sympathetic folks who feel a similar call. So it wasn't hard to get people interested in this model community. A key to it that's different from a lot of intentional communities is that each family unit has its own space. You can close the door, you have your own kitchen, your own bathroom, so we don't want to argue over putting the tube back on the toothpaste.
Right.
So that practical thing, I think, makes it a different model.
Mhm.
But we have certain disciplines of 3 times of prayer a week. And also during Advent, we've been having Sunday evening Advent services, which have been really lovely. We have a community dinner every week, and often folks come together with us. And we care together for the property and try to do some gardening. But there are also these informal ways in which we're supporting each other. One of our members works at a low-income health clinic with poor, mostly Hispanic population, a lot of HIV, and she's finding a lot of queer folks and trans folks, and she's pushing this organization, which is conservative Christian, to be more open to the real needs of queer and trans people. So that's exciting. Whatever, and then sometimes we come together, we all want to do this action, go to this rally, or support this person being released. Right now we have a young woman who just was released from a detention center, and we're sponsoring her in this phase where she's awaiting a trial for asylum. Because that's a issue I've been so disheartened and horrified by the treatment. So to be able to personally open our home to someone has been really important. And I'm trying to learn Spanish.
So it's also even that you're offering this to the community with intention, it's also doing something to you, to your family. And what has been the impact? What do you say? I mean, you're married. We have two wonderful teenagers who are amazing. I have to get them on the show. I'm going to have to do a teen special because they are just brilliant minds. What has been the impact for you and your family having this for so many years, and your children being a part of this community as well?
Let me speak to our children first. Now, they were already a few years old when the community came into being, but even before that, we made a commitment when we had kids. We're not going to buy the minivan and go to the suburbs. We're going to try to maintain the same lifestyle and just offer it to the kids. Because I sometimes hear kids from activist parents whose parents, opted for more safety and security, but tell all the stories of back in the day when we did this, and the teens say, "Wow, that sounded like fun," and I mean, that sounded beautiful. Why didn't you keep it up? So we often had guests to our house. We had a lot of diverse population. We had some of our residents from Project H.O.M.E come. I especially am grateful that Vincent Harding, Dr. Vincent Harding, who was an associate of Dr. King and was just a powerful historian of the Black liberation struggle. He was a good friend of ours.
Yeah, I'm sorry I never got to meet him, but I did have the opportunity to travel with his daughter, Rachel, who definitely has a special place in my heart, and the exposure that I got in Brazil. Hope to get her on the show as well. Go ahead and drop all of these names. You're invited.
That would be a great show. So just ahead, I sit back and my kids engage with those folks. I mean, from an early age, they were engaging in adult conversation. So I think the sense of community was instilled in them early on. There are other issues. They were often a white minority in the public schools. We're very committed to the public schools. And though they tell us now, it was pretty hard for those years. Luke especially will say it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And it was very formative of his sense of the world and vocation. I think they really feel, instinctively compassionate toward folks. I think they understand the commitments we have. I think, you never can know what you are responsible for in parenting, either good or bad. But, thanks be to God, they're very different from the consumeristic teens in a lot of ways, and I think they have strong vocations. And I think they contribute to the community. It's nice to have younger people and bring in their perspectives.
Indeed. I have not shared this with anybody, and I don't think.
Oh, I'm on the edge of my seat.
I don't think your daughter, the prophet, have shared it with you, but I happened to be out one night, and this is when I was your pastor.
Yes.
And here comes your daughter. I was at a concert. Here comes your daughter at the same concert, and I was like, it was one of those moments like, should I be here or should you be here? I feel like one of us shouldn't be here. But no, it was a great moment to know that we shared this particular love interest for music. And just seeing her in the space. But she is both of them very mature. And so I love to engage in conversation with them because I just don't know all they know, and they know so much. And Luke in particular, you said that, you all were committed to public education and runs Urban Ed, right?
Yeah,
one of the leaders there.
He and another student founded Urban Ed, an advocacy group run by students for public school, advocating for all kinds of issues of equity and empowerment in the public school system. Even though he's in his third year of college, he's still working on it, and it's just very exciting. When I think, just particularly my long-time struggles to be racially responsible, it's, I'm in my 40s and 50s, it's like I still don't, maybe I've made some progress, but I'm still struggling with some really basic things. But what I'm very grateful for is my kids are so much ahead of the game with just some basic understandings of racial equity and diverse community. And so that I'm really grateful for.
I commend you and Dee Dee. But I think that is one major way that a lot of us can be racially responsible, morally responsible. Those with children, like, what are you passing down to your children? Because it is that really shifts the way the world changes, what we're pouring into our children.
And Luke, early on, like I think at age 12, he wrote an article for this Christian magazine, Conspire, and he said if white folks really want to build racial justice, they have to go to black places. They have to go to black churches and black schools. You can't do it from a distance. And it's an amazing insight. So I'm still learning from them, whether it's the right slang or I'm still saying things that are, very, light. They're calling me on it. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. What are some of the theologians, and it doesn't have to be theologians, theologian, past and present, the things that influence you or moves you, aside from your kids, because I know, I know they can move you. Art, music, things like that grounds you, but moves you at the same time.
Well, I always say the most important theologians in my life have been Dostoevsky and Flannery O'Connor. I'm an English major.
Okay.
I don't know, I had a real deep searching time when I was a college student and trying to find a spiritual path. There's something about Dostoevsky, that notion of passion in the midst of human struggle and pain. This just unrelenting engagement with the harshness of life and finding joy and truth there. So I try to read the Brothers Karamazov once every decade of my life. I got to read it again now in my 60s. And Flannery O'Connor, the American Southern author, who uses grotesque and shocking forms of storytelling to kind of break us into new space to receive grace. She's had a huge impact on me. I've drawn generally from certain what I would call streams. I mean, from an early day, feminist communities, more recently women's communities, the gay and lesbian community, in their approach to scripture and theology and ministry. I'm just still learning from those in so many immense ways. In terms of biblical work, Walter Brueggemann and folks like that have been very important to me. James Cone. And I guess I'm part of a network of, strangely enough, mostly white cis men and some women and queer folks throughout North America who are engaging in kind of anti-imperial theology and doing political readings of scripture.
We're going to get into pop culture. And so you've mentioned the great Dr. Martin Luther King, beloved community. And I would argue, and I love Dr. King, I love the work. I am a Morehouse grad from ITC, was able to learn so much about him living in Atlanta, because that's where most of the foundational roots took place, and developing what we now understand as the beloved community. And here I am in Philadelphia, where Martin is still somewhat a figure, but Malcolm is definitely heavier of a profound image here. I don't know how to phrase this question, but it's not either or. But what is the wrestle between Malcolm and Martin? You think?
That's a great question.
Aside from the obvious, one is Christian and one is Muslim. What is something that we miss in knowing who these figures were during the time that they served the community and what was going on at the time?
Well, can I start with a story that's related?
Sure, because I love your stories. Go ahead.
Now, this was conveyed to me by a former pastor of mine, Reverend Donna Jones, who you know.
Yes.
Her church is in West Philly, and there's a really important park in West Philly, which is Malcolm X Park, and it's a hub of the community. And I was there with her for a church event, and she relayed a story of how white folks are moving into that neighborhood. Okay, well,
they have,
and it's creating the kind of tension you might expect. And in fact, it's almost hard to tell this story, but there was a family had rented the big pavilion and registered and had all the permits and stuff for a family reunion. So dozens and dozens of people in the park, and apparently one of the new white neighbors called the police. Right, I guess first came out and told them they had to be quiet, and then they said, hey, we have the permits and all, and then they went back and they called the police. And literally, police came out, she says, with almost riot gear and surrounded them.
How long ago was this?
This was apparently this summer.
This summer?
Yeah. This is
wow.
Not 1963. Just, one white voice says, I'm in charge of this neighborhood now, but just the symbolism of that is, it's just,
yeah.
I can't believe it, I can't believe it. Well, I will say that Dr. King was a huge influence on me, but there's a personal element to this because one of my former jobs was at The Other Side magazine, which is published right up the street. It was an independent Christian magazine, devoted to issues of social justice and peace. That's where I met Dee Dee, my partner. And about the year 2000, we felt called to do a special issue on Martin Luther King because many of us, and this was true of a lot of dialogue around the country at the time, a lot of folks were frustrated how he was being domesticated. And everything about King was 1963, I Have a Dream, and Toyota Fawn sale on Dr. King's holiday.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to put together an issue reclaiming the real radical spirit of Dr. King, especially in his later years, where he was taking on the war, he was taking on capitalism, he was proclaiming a Poor People's Campaign. And we did consult with Dr. Harding, Vincent Harding, and that's how I got to know him. And he and I collaborated on an article that was sort of the core article of the issue. But then we invited different people to contribute to that issue. And one was Grace Lee Boggs, who was an elder in Detroit, an African-American woman who every activist in Detroit knew for years. She was just a really important figure. And she wrote an article called From Malcolm to Martin. And she had been a fierce Malcolmite at the time, and like a lot of folks early on, that nonviolence was weak. It wasn't what we needed. We need to stand up. And she said, as she immersed herself in the later, more radical vision of King, she said, "Wait a minute, there's a connection here." And that's a thing. A lot of folks, Christians and others, there's still. I think there's more voices about that, but there's still a great ignorance about the radicalness of King. And I don't know if we can determine this, but was it influenced by Malcolm? I like to believe it was. I think
both too.
Yeah.
There was the radicalness of King, and I believe Malcolm was portrayed to be this hard, vigilant person, and I think throughout and even towards the end, the softness, I don't want to say docile because he, not at all, but there was the softness part that we don't often get to hear or see with Malcolm that we often see with King.
Well, the trip to Mecca had such a huge impact on him,
Indeed.
and I think did soften his radical anti-white stance because here's God's people of all colors. I think there was a convergence in their life, and what would have happened if they both lived? I like to think there would have been a deeper convergence. I think America in general, especially white folks, in the same way we're holding on to a very tame version of King, we're still holding on to a very rigid and false version of Malcolm, the militant. And so there's still a lot of fear around him because he was a truth teller in ways that King did not do much, maybe near the end of his life. He just was unrelenting and talking to the white power structure and no holds barred, just told it. And that was always hard still is, for white folks to hear. So I think both important historical figures need deeper understanding. I think there's a lot of rich space for dialogue among all our communities on what they both bring. And the differences between them, a little bit more militancy on one hand, which is necessary, maybe in the nonviolent struggle that I think we still need to learn very deeply, but also learn they're not necessarily different.
I have a question. This was not planned, but
Okay.
and I don't expect you to be the spokesperson for all white people.
I haven't met them all, so no idea.
But I do want to know, what is the fear? What is this fear of Malcolm that is not that we do not see with Martin, especially within the white community? I think there's a lot of praising, there's a lot of celebration, and Malcolm is not heard of. I didn't hear about Malcolm probably until I was, if not in 12th grade in high school, into college.
Yeah. It's funny because when you go deep into the two histories, they were both telling the truth about white supremacy. King started doing it more directly later on, but he was doing it in strong ways early as well. But with Malcolm, he was very vocal and, I don't want to say strident, but prophetic about it. And he just named it so clearly, and white folks don't want to hear that. They take King and turn it into, we all can get along and we don't have to change anything. A white girl and black girl can play together on the playground holding hands. Again, 1963, not 1968. A lot happened in that time. But if we could freeze it in that notion that as long as white people are nice, we're okay. And Malcolm would have no part of that. because he said, every one of you manifests the system, and the system is just evil. And I think King began to understand that, which is why we don't focus on the later years of King. White people do not want to think of themselves as oppressors. Whenever issues of reparation come up, they can't ignore the injustice of slavery, but the easy answer is, oh, well, that was hundreds of years ago. It's not an issue anymore. It's a deep existential thing that I would say most white Americans know that the system is screwed up, and they're deeply complicit, and probably even better say deeply guilty. And when it's like truth within a family system of alcoholism or something. The more you know it but don't want to face it, the greater the resistance is. It's interesting that reparations is coming up again as a political issue, which is really exciting. But just watch the resistance; it's gonna get fierce again.
I mean, I was just reflecting on just this whole campaign coming into 2020, and I do vision boarding, and I just kind of I've been really reflecting on the past decade, and I'm like, wow, first time in history, I am honored to be a part of history where I'm able to see Black, white, gay, Hispanic, the Democratic candidate.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, man, woman, just all of it being represented, and it reflects where we are in our community. People are wanting justice for themselves, for others, and there are people who are MAGA County who's making America great again. But just to see it in all of it in a platform is a direct reflection of where we are as a society and where we want to go as a people. What we want to leave for the next generation.
Well, MAGA is itself an act of fear, right?
Indeed.
Take us back.
Indeed.
Because we don't want to face it. But one could say maybe the gift, if you will, and this is a stretch, of Tsar Donald, is that the severity of his rhetoric, which is both very old and new in that it's just, what the hell, I'm just going to say it, maybe that has stimulated a deeper sense among the communities of resistance and progressive communities that we have to come together.
We do.
So maybe we thank God for working through that, but still it's an ugly time. And the very ugliness hopefully can bring us together across color, class, gender, religion. And I always find when that happens, like I say early on, that's such a passionate thing for me when that happens. There's such a deep truth to that. It's hard work.
It's hard. Well, how can people get in contact with you? If you can share the website, more information about all that you do, if you can share with our watchers.
Well, not a great one on social media, but there is an Alternative Seminary website that drastically needs updating, but you can at least learn about it on www.alternativeseminary.net. And I'm not sure, we have a Vine and Fig Tree website that's also in transition, so it's probably best to Google Vine and Fig Tree Philadelphia, and I think the website comes up. If people want to get in touch with me, my email is willobrien, WILLOBRIEN 59 @gmail.com.